The good news I can tell you is that to be a great investor, you don't have to have a terrific IQ. What you do need is the right temperament. You need to be able to detach yourself from the views of others. What I like to do first is I like to value the business before I even look at its price. And if you can learn how to value a business and your value comes to X and it's selling for half X, and you know what you're doing, you're going to make a lot of money.
Colas, the home for wealth and wisdom.
The good news I can tell you is that to be a great investor, you don't have to have a terrific IQ. You know, if you've got 160 IQ, sell 30 points to somebody else because you won't need it in investing. What you do need is the right temperament. You need to be able to detach yourself from the views of others or the opinions of others. You need to be able to look at the facts about a business, about an industry, and evaluate a business unaffected by what other people think. And that is very difficult for most people. I mean, most people have sometimes a herd mentality, which can, under certain circumstances, develop into delusionary behavior. I mean, you saw that in the internet craze and so on. So I would say that I'm sure everybody in this room has the intelligence to do extremely well in investments. And the 160s won't beat the 130s at all, necessarily. They may, but I mean, they do not have a big edge. But the ones that have the edge are the ones who really have the temperament to sit, look at a business, look at an industry, and not care what the person next to them thinks about it. Not care what they read about it in the newspaper, not care what they hear about in television, not listen to people who say, you know, this is going to happen or that's going to happen. You have to come to your own conclusions, and you have to do it based on facts that are available. If you don't have enough facts to reach a conclusion, you forget it. You go on to the next one. So you have to also have the willingness to walk away from things that other people think are very simple. And that's, a lot of people don't have that. I mean, I don't know why it is. And I've been asked a lot of times whether that was something that you're born with or something you learn, and I'm not sure I know the answer. But temperament's important. If you don't know the answer yourself, don't expect somebody else to tell you. Okay. And if you don't know the answer yourself and somebody else says they know the answer, don't let that fact push you into coming to a conclusion about something that you just don't know enough to come to a conclusion on. I look at individual companies, and if I find a business, what I like to do first is I like to value the business before I even look at its price. Because if I look at the price of the stock, it will have some impact on my valuation. If I like to go in without having the faintest idea what the stock is selling for, and I look at a stock as a piece of a business, so it's what the business is selling for. So I look at the business first and value it, but I don't really care about a lot of innovations in a market. And in the end, I just want to buy a piece of a business that I feel has a good future, honest and able management, and buy it at the right price. And whether there's an option market attached or any of that sort of thing, it really has no impact on us. We're in the business of buying businesses. And we buy some of them in their entirety. We like to do that particularly. But some of them we buy part of. We own part of Coca-Cola, but we own all of 70-some businesses. Well, if I drive by a McDonald's stand or a Kentucky Fried Chicken stand, I will automatically think to myself, what is this business worth? You know, and how many customers can walk in the door? What kind of gross margins can they have? How many people do they need? How likely it is that another chicken stand opens across the street? I mean, all of those things. And that's true of the chicken stand, and it's true of Google or you name the business. I mean, it's all about evaluating the economic potential, the economic future of a given business. And most of them you don't know the answer on. But every now and then you run into one where you know the answer. But that's all business is. It's what Aesop said a long time ago. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. You know, that was said in 600 BC, and that's now what's called discounted cash flow and all that sort of thing. But Aesop had it figured out, you know, 2,600 years ago. And all I'm trying to figure out is, if I take that dollar in my hand, when do I get the $2 out of the bush? How sure am I of getting it out of the bush? Is there some other bush where I can get $3 out of it instead? I mean, it's very basic stuff. And a lot of times you look at it and you say, I don't know how many birds there will be in the bush. So you go on to the next one until you find one you know. And if you can learn how to value a business and your value comes to X and it's selling for half X, and you know what you're doing, you're going to make a lot of money. You won't make it tomorrow or next week necessarily, but you'll make it at some point. And when you think about it, I'll talk in terms of the United States market, but you're looking at $20 trillion or something worth of stocks. You're looking at businesses that start with Abbott Laboratories and end up, with some company that starts with a Z at the end. I mean, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of businesses. You don't have to be right on anything except one. And their prices change every day. If you look at the typical stock on the New York Stock Exchange, its high will be perhaps, for the last 12 months, will be 150% of its low. So they're bobbing all over the place. And all you have to do is sit there and wait until something is really attractive that you understand, and you can forget about everything else. That is a wonderful game to play in. I mean, there's almost nothing where the game is stacked in your favor like the stock market. And then what happens is people start listening to everybody talk on television or whatever it may be, or read paper, and they take what is a fundamental advantage and turn it into a disadvantage. But there's no easier game than stocks. But you just have to be sure you don't play too often. If you can't recognize the moat, it doesn't mean there isn't one there. It may mean just you can't recognize it, and then you go on to the next one. You don't have to buy any given stock. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of stocks trading just in the United States or on the New York Stock Exchange. And you don't have to be right on every one of them. You only have to be right on the ones that you buy. And so there are times when I can see that there's a moat around a product. Take Coca-Cola. I mean, if you've been selling a product since 1886, and every year you sell more than the year before, and finally you're selling, in terms of all Coca-Cola products, 1.6 billion 8-ounce servings a day, you've got a moat around that product. Now, the moat is partly the taste of the product itself, but it's also the association that comes to your mind. If I say Coca-Cola, everybody in this room has something in their mind about it. And what we hope at Coca-Cola is that it's something favorable. So we want to be around you when you're experiencing moments of happiness. So we are going to be at the Olympics and the World Cup, and we're going to be at Disneyland and all kinds of places where you're happy. And that, over time, will build something in your mind about a product. I can name 100 other soft drinks, and there's nothing in your mind about them. And that presence of mind, with billions of people all over the world having something favorable in their mind about their product, it's huge over time. We do have this candy company, See's Candy in California. If a 16-year-old in California buys a box of that candy and takes it to the girl that he's fallen for and presents it to her or to her family before they go to the movies, and she kisses him, we own him. I mean, forever. He is not going to try another product. That's a moat. And every day, with every product, the moat widens or narrows. And when our people that are selling See's Candy smile at a customer after standing on their feet for 8 hours, it widens the moat. If they snarl at them, it narrows the moat. So every single activity. And we look for businesses with very durable and wide moats. And if you name a company out of the blue, I can't tell you whether it has a moat or not, but all I have to do is be right about the ones I look at.
And how much do you actually get involved in advising them on these aspects?
Well, I send a letter to the managers, and I talk to them about widening the moat. I say, it isn't a question of the earnings per share this quarter or anything like that. Any business that has a widening moat is going to make a lot of money over time. And they are guardians of the moat. I say a great business is like an economic castle. And if you have an economic castle in capitalism, there are going to be a bunch of people who are going to try and take it away from you. So I need a knight in that castle, the manager, who worries about protecting that castle all the time. And then I want this moat around it. And I want that moat to get wider. It may be service. It may be better product design. All kinds of things. It can be what's in their mind about the product, a consumer product, but I want that moat to be widening. And I want people to toss sharks and piranha, octopus, everything into that moat to keep away those competitors, because they're going to be coming. And our managers are charged with that. I tell our managers, pretend that this is the only business that you and your family can own for the next 100 years. You can't sell it, and you've got to make this one work. And that means every day thinking about what's going to make it a great business over 100 years. Say that I probably look at the price of Berkshire once every 2 weeks.
That's
Something like
it.
that. Yeah, no, it doesn't make any difference. I haven't bought or sold a share for 40 years. So somebody said, when's a good time to sell Berkshire? I said, I don't know. I've never sold any. The only time I'm interested in the price of a stock is when I'm either buying or selling it. And if we're buying one stock right now, I hope it goes down, obviously, because I've got billions of dollars worth of left to buy.
Right.
And most people like their stocks to go up. I like our stocks to go down because I form my own independent judgment of what they're worth, and the cheaper they are, the better it is from our standpoint.
Absolutely.
Volatility is the friend of the... I love volatility. If no stock ever moved around very much, it'd be impossible to make any real money. Volatility is your friend. You can turn it into your enemy. I mean, if you get worried when your stocks go down or you feel like you ought to rush in and buy things because they've gone up, volatility is your enemy. But if volatility means that a very good company someday will sell at X, and sometime later it'll sell at 2/3 of X, and another time it'll sell at 1.5 times X, you will get very rich if you can just keep figuring out what X is. And volatility is what will enable you to make a lot of money. So anytime people get upset about volatility, they don't really understand the nature of markets and how they should be thinking about them. The more volatile the market, the more money we'll make at Berkshire. I don't have the faintest idea which ones will be the winners. I know there will be winners, but I don't know. I met Bill in 1991, and he'd been pretty successful up to that point, and he kept being successful. But I didn't know what his company would look like in 10 years. I didn't even know Google was going to exist. I didn't know what Oracle was going to. I didn't know anything about what the industry was going to look like. I knew the chewing gum business would look the same 10 years later, or the Coca-Cola would look how it would look 10 years later. It wasn't a negative view. It was simply a acknowledgement on my part that I did not know enough about the businesses in the future to foresee who the winner would be. And it would be exactly like if you went back to 1910, when there were probably, by that time, 1,000 auto companies in the United States. Ford was going to be enormously successful, General Motors was going to be enormously successful, and 900 and plus of them were going to disappear. And I wouldn't have known which one was going to be the winner. I know who's going to be the winner in certain businesses, and when I know it, I back it up big time. We also believe in making big bets when we know we're right. I mean, the idea of doing a little of this, a little of that, a little of that, I call that the Noah's Ark approach. I mean, we do not want a zoo when we get through with 2 of every animal. We want to concentrate on things that we really understand. When we find something good, we take a big swing at it. I think it's very easy. I don't mean it's easy in a day or a week or a month, but if you keep doing things that make sense, you know, and it is like a snowball going downhill. I mean, it does accumulate bigger and bigger as time goes by, and particularly if you're using wet snow. So you can't help almost if you spend a lifetime working at something productively, you know, assuming that you've got above average intelligence and lots of energy and all of that. But wealth will build up, and it will do it now just like it did 20 years ago, 50. I think it's easier now, actually, in many ways. Don't do anything in life where if somebody asks you the reason why you're doing it, the answer is everybody else is doing it. I mean, if you just cancel that as a rationale for doing any activity in life, you'll live a better life, whether it's at the stock market or any place else. I've seen more dumb things, and sometimes even, you know, illegal things, but justified on the basis of everybody else is doing it. You don't need to do what everybody else is doing it. It's maddening during the internet craze, you know, when the bubble was going on, and here's your neighbor who's got an IQ 50 points below you, you know, and he's making all this easy money, and your wife is telling you, you know, this jerk next door is making money, you know, and you're smarter than he is, and why aren't you making money? Well, you have to forget about all that sort of thing. You just have to do what works, what you understand, and if you don't understand it and somebody else is doing it, don't get envious or anything of the sort. You know, just go on and wait till you find something you understand. I really never, I feel I've been so lucky. I mean, here I was in 1930, you know, I could have emerged from any womb in the world, right? But the womb I emerged from happened to be in the United States, which offered enormous opportunity to me. My life would have been way different if I'd been born someplace else. I was wired in the right way for a capitalist market system. Had nothing to do with anything I did myself. I was a male, which gave me an enormous advantage in the United States back in the 30s and 40s, and over having been born a female with exactly otherwise the same quality. So I won what I call the ovarian lottery, you know, very early on. Yeah, that's what it is. It's an ovarian lottery. I mean, just before you emerge, you get this ticket, you know, and it may say black or white, it may say white, it may say male, female, maybe say smart, dumb, whatever it may be. Nothing to do with, you know, my qualities or, you know, anything else. And I got very, very, very lucky. And having been as lucky as I've been lucky in marriage, I've been lucky in profession, I've been lucky in teachers, lucky in all kinds of ways. I never look back and think about anything that could have been different. I mean, I'm looking forward to tomorrow. I mean, there's going to be a lot of good things happen in the rest of my life. And there'll be there'll be mistakes I make. I'm going to make mistakes. Mistakes don't bother me. I don't want to make any mistakes that jeopardize in a significant way anything that's important. But to try and live your life totally free of mistakes is a life of inaction. And I like to believe in people. And occasionally you're going to be disappointed if you believe in people. But I think you're way better off going through life trusting, I mean, with some discretion, but still trusting people than having a big shell around you and not letting anybody inside. So, you know, I can't think of any really particular regret I have, no.
So, Mr. Buffett, this is not an insensitive question, but 50 years from now, we all got to go sometime. What would you like on your tombstone?
Here lies the oldest man that ever lived.
Subscribe now to ensure you never miss valuable insights from the world's leading financial experts.